Welcome back to Learning is the New Working, brought to you by me, Chris Pirrie, and the Learning Futures Group. And to this episode, which is part of Season 4, also known as Learning for Good. If you're a regular listener, you'll know that this season we're doing something different. We're exploring the workplace learning practices of the $200 billion international aid and development industry to see what we can learn about how learning helps build capacity, trust, engagement, and changes lives around the world. I've partnered with erstwhile Microsoft colleague and seasoned co-curator Lutz Ziob, and we'll be talking to an array of practitioners in the development sector who are building skills for all kinds of aid professionals in large and small NGOs, and also building local capacity at the point of need for sustained impact and social good across the world. We'll particularly focus on Africa and the Global South. We think there's a lot that corporate learning professionals and learning leaders can learn from this sector, where capacity building is a key ingredient, whether it's the incredible rate of tech adoption in the Global South, the need to operate at massive scale, the critical importance of effective localization, and the agility and innovation born out of necessity and tight resources. There really is a lot we can learn. Today's guest, to kick off the season, is Raj Kumar. He'll help us define the landscape of this extraordinary sector and frame up the forces of disruption that they're facing. Raj is the founder and editor-in-chief of Devex, an entrepreneur, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, a trustee of Save the Children, and an impact investor. He has an undergraduate degree from Georgetown. He launched a .com, worked for a stint in a political campaign, then ultimately dropped out of his master's program at Harvard Kennedy School to found Devexs, amazingly at the urging of his Harvard professor. Devexs is a media platform for the global development community with the motto, do good, do it well. It's the largest provider of recruiting and business development services for global development. It has 100 employees with offices in Manila, Washington, D.C., and Barcelona. And, like much of the sector, it works at incredible scale, serving 1 million constituents and digitally convening over 800,000 professionals every year. Raj is, I think, perfectly positioned to launch our podcast season, Learning for Good. I asked him to set the scene and give us a primer on how this industry works and who the players are. Let's listen into my conversation with Raj Kumar. Raj Kumar, welcome to Learning is the New Working.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, really happy to be part of this.
I saw you at the Humantum conference. You gave me a copy of your book, which I devoured on the plane home, The Business of Changing the World. And I thought you would be a fantastic guest to frame up for us this season that we're doing and give us some context for what's going on in this amazing sector.
Very happy to do that. Yeah, it is a sector that, well, first of all, most people don't even think of it as an industry. But actually, it's a $200 billion industry if you add it all up. This is the money going to charities and nonprofits and foundations and foreign aid. And, there's actually a lot happening in that space, even though it can be thought of as a sort of a sleepy and bureaucratic space. There's a lot happening, and it has huge influence on the kind of future trajectory of the world. So I agree. It's an important topic to get into.
The workplace learning industry, by some measures, is about $200 billion as well. So there's some food for thought there, and we'll perhaps dive into that. But I like to...
And by the way, Chris, just as a way to get people's heads around that giant number, that's about the same amount of sales of iPhones every year. There's about $200 billion sales of iPhones every year.
It's the magic number for today. Well, let's go. I usually start by a sort of quick fire round just so we can get a sketch of you and your work practice and introduce you to the audience. Can you start by telling us where you live and where do you work and why?
So I live and work in Washington, D.C., and I'm there in part because it's really kind of the epicenter of the global development industry, of the aid industry. That's where you've got USAID and the World Bank and so many other actors in our field. And so soon after founding Devex, my partners and I said, we've got to get down to DC. And I'm there with my wife, Maria Teresa Kumar, and our 2 lovely kids. And it's a great city, and we love to call it home.
Awesome. Love it. It is the center of the universe for aid, I think, in the US at least. What's your job title, Raj, and what do you really do?
So the title is President and Editor-in-Chief. The president side is kind of running the business of Devex, the social enterprise side of it. So making sure we have the revenues and the management of people, et cetera. And then the editor-in-chief side is, we're a news organization. So everything from the journalism we produce through articles, the videos we do, the events that we host, the surveys that we do. I'm looking after the editorial angle and the vision behind our news product. So those are that's why I've got this long title, but that's what it all means.
And I've learned to ask in this sector about mission. Is there a mission of Devex, and can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, there is. It's kind of in our tagline, right in our logo, you see it, and we use it all the time. You get kind of sick of it. We use it so much. It's do good, do it well. And that has been our logo and our theme and our mission since the day we started. And the basic concept is a big industry trying to do good things in the world. But if we can do it well, if we can be efficient and effective in our work, we can have enormous impact. And so our basic idea is, as Devexs, can we help drive the aid industry to be just a little bit more efficient, just a little bit more effective? Even 1 or 2% would be like adding another Gates Foundation to the world. So that's the mission that we're on.
And what services do you provide? What do you do to make all this happen?
So we're a lot like a media platform. We provide news and information. The things that we do that might be a little bit unique to our sector is we've got a big recruitment component to what we do. So we have a job board that's quite popular and a database of now over 1 million professionals who work in global development. And we're widely used by major development organizations and NGOs and aid agencies and UN agencies and the like to hire their people. Everything from, high-level C-suite positions all the way down. They utilize our recruitment services. And then the other thing that we do that may not be so obvious to someone who's more familiar with typical media platform business models is we do tracking of business opportunities, business intelligence, market intelligence, and we have a whole data analytics team that's studying the funding flows in our industry and helping organizations figure out where to get that next grant or where to position their funding strategy in the future.
Got it right. And this concept of grants, for our audience is massive in this sector. It's kind of how things operate. What is your business model for Devexs, Raj?
So it's very much like a traditional media platform. It's subscriptions, it's advertising, it's events, communication services. That's a lot of it. And then the things that are unique are the ones I just mentioned, recruitment and business intelligence. So it's a blend of business lines that all together help to support our overall organization, which is a little over 130 people now globally, and serves an audience of a bit over 1 million global development professionals.
Yeah, that's a pretty good-sized audience. Can you tell? I assume these are people who are working in the aid sector. Are they multinational? Are they around the world? What do you know about your audience?
Yeah, we know quite a bit about them, and they're all over the world. And these are people who are practitioners, really. These are folks who work at places like Save the Children or the World Bank. And they are, people on the front lines doing aid work directly, or they might be people back in headquarters in all different kinds of job titles. And it's a pretty wide group at this point that we reach out to. And we have some specific content for specific verticals within that broad category, but it's a really diverse industry.
And what are you proud of achieving? You've been in business for, I think, 10 years. Is that correct?
Actually longer. It started as a student project 19 years ago.
Oh man.
So we were small scale during many of those early years. We were working out of my apartment. This was a dream and a vision that took quite a bit of time to realize. But yeah, we've been around 19 years. The proudest thing is when we can see direct impact from our work. And that might be as simple as meeting an engineer. This has happened many times where, I'm traveling maybe in sub-Saharan Africa and I meet an engineer who says, without Devexs, I couldn't have gotten a job in the aid industry in my own country. I see these projects going on around me, but it just felt hard to get connected to the industry, and Devexs has helped to do that. Or meeting a student who says, you've really helped me figure out my career path in the development sector and understand it. Or an NGO that says, hey, we were having trouble diversifying our funding sources, and Devexs kind of helped us navigate that. So it's those kinds of impacts. And of course, through our journalism, we've written content that helps to really change minds and opinions that can influence large sums of money and major, projects and approaches in development. And that happens all the time. So those kinds of things really make us proud.
Well, I think it's really interesting that you're sort of in the talent business as well as the content business as well. And that definitely will resonate with our audience. But what I wanted to ask you to do, if you could today, was kind of give us a primer on the space. You call it an industry, and I like that. It operates in very, very different ways to the private sector, but nevertheless, big money involved, big impact involved. And I read your book, and you said
something really interesting when you sort of moved into the first time. You sort of talk about having permission to ask the most basic and simple questions because you didn't have a sort of background in the space. And you said that often those questions kind of get the most illuminating answers. And I think the book itself is a great primer. I'm going to recommend people read this. But could you just kind of lay out, can you just build the building blocks of the international aid industry for us? Who are the major players and how does it work?
Yeah, happy to do that. As you say, ignorance can be an asset sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
And I really didn't understand the industry. And I asked the stupid questions that, I didn't know enough to know they were stupid questions that I asked them. And so what I tried to do in my book, sitting down to write this, was to write it in a way that would have appealed to me 19 years ago. When I was a grad student, that you could just read it and understand in plain English, what are we actually talking about here? What is this big complex industry really all about? And, at bottom, basically, this is an industry that is designed to move large sums of money from the richest countries in the world to some of the poorest countries in the world to address really basic human needs, to everything that kind of gets wrapped up in a word like poverty. And there's still 10% of the world that lives in extreme poverty, which is less than $1.90 a day. It's kind of an unimaginable existence. And so you have this huge disparity in wealth in the world, and you've got the rich countries that after World War II, sometimes even, well before that, set up these systems for sending money to poor countries, often through U.S. or European organizations. And that has grown to be this really large $200 billion industry. So it includes government aid agencies like USAID, that's paid for with U.S. taxpayer money, and USAID will go out into the world and say, okay, we want to partner with a country like Malawi. We want to talk to their government, understand their needs. And we think, let's say, a big need is increasing agricultural yields for all their small-scale farmers. And so they'll then put out a request for proposal, and maybe a company, a contracting company, or a nonprofit organization will bid on that, try to get some of that U.S. grant money or U.S. contract money to go to Malawi and run a project for 3 to 5 years, working with farmers, helping them to train them perhaps, or helping to build out the agricultural extension service or build out irrigation or whatever they might think is the answer to solving the agricultural yield problem in the country. And that's really the way the industry, that's a big part of how the industry has been designed. It's not the whole thing. Of course, you've got individuals all over the world who are writing small checks, making donations online to nonprofits that they care about, on issues they care about, and that adds up as well to be a significant sum. And then you've got, the big private foundations. Gates is the largest in the world. Wellcome Trust, the largest in the UK. And there are many others, Rockefeller and Ford and plenty we haven't heard of that I detail in the book, especially from new money in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. So it's really, it's a whole combo. And then I add into this mix just for good measure, just to complexify it a little bit more, but I think it's real, is that nowadays business is in this too. I know you used to work at a company like Microsoft. Microsoft, I would consider being part of this industry. Starbucks, we walk to a Starbucks and the coffee of the day is from Rwanda. We don't even think twice about it anymore. Starbucks has to go to a country like that, work with smallholder farmers, make sure that the quality of their coffee is high, that they've got sustainable water resources, that their kids are in school and not work in the coffee plants. So really, in a way, Starbucks is part of this industry. And so if you put your arms around it, the consumers, investors, taxpayers, the aid industry, the way I envision it, is a much bigger industry than just kind of the charity and nonprofit sector.
Definitely got it. That's interesting, and we're going to drive down in some of those public-private partnerships in our series. So that's kind of exciting. If in the risk of asking a really stupid, obvious question, I think it's good to rehearse it in the spirit of what you just said. Is why is it fundamentally a good idea to invest in humanitarian and development aid? And I mean, obviously, it feels good to do that. It feels like a human need to help fellow people. But there's also a little bit of a sort of colonial era angle to this as well. What's motivating people to kind of do this?
Yeah, it's actually a pretty fundamental and important question. And, it's not easy to answer, but I would say a big part of it is still the colonial era, right? So what came out of an imperial and colonial era? A very unequal world, where you've got, countries like the US and Europe where maybe the average annual spending on one person's healthcare might be